Well, I think we're all good. I think we're all good. No, it is great. I'm hoping this can be as interactive as possible. So what I'll do, I'll get the PowerPoint up. It's only a short one so that we have time to actually talk. But I thought if we had some structure to talk around, then that will be better than not. So if I get this up and get this sharing, hopefully.
And just give us a little bit of an intro to Anne.
A little bit of an intro. Well, here we go. Why home education is the best way, basically. I'm here because I have, I'll explain a little bit about who I am, but it's basically how schools really can't compete with home education when it comes to meeting sensory needs. So this is a very, very bold claim. And when I saw the title and was reading about what Truth Bomb was all about this year, I just thought, right, no, I just have to come out and say it, that this is actually what I truly believe. And I will explain why as we go through that basically schools cannot compete with home ed when it comes to meeting sensory needs. And I am still in schools. I support schools. I am not anti-school in any way, shape or form. But and I'm in like 13 schools at the moment, going around and trying to help the children engage with learning and trying to help their behaviors and trying to train and equip, but it just does not compare with what we can do at home. So I'll go through. So I'm a sensory health coach. I'm an occupational therapist too, but I primarily am about sensory health. And I've defined it because it wasn't out there as a term beforehand, but about children and adults being calm, content, confident, and coordinated. Sensory underpinnings can be a part of all of those. Obviously, there's other reasons why people aren't calm or content, confident, or coordinated. There might be some brain damage, there might be other things going on. But sensory processing has a massive impact in these things. And it's just checking that you know about them, and also to affirm that actually, if you have your children at home, then it is the best place. It has its own struggles, it has its own issues that would be good to talk about, but it's still so much better than school. So there is the website if you want to find out any more. I have these online sensory super systems, which is about equipping and empowering parents. Just a bit of my background. I'm an occupational therapist with distinction. I'm an advanced practitioner in sensory integration and have a postgraduate diploma in SI with commendation. I'm a mentor for the Sensory Integration Education Network. So I mentor folk internationally. And I am a home educating mum of 22 years. So yeah, I was always working at the same time as home edding, which has its own complexities within it, but it's totally doable if you know how and why and what you're doing and priorities are set. So our boys are thriving. My coming 22-year-old is they're all doing really well. So yeah, a very, very, very happy home edding mum, but it's really nice to be able to speak into this from a sensory perspective, which obviously is my experience and what I've trained in and continue to love training in. So there's a book if you're interested. I will tell you some things, as it says here, about what further support is offered if you're interested. But we are going to look at a sample of sensory issues that impact education, both at school and at home. Plenty of time hopefully for Q&A, and I'd love it if you would offer your thoughts or your questions or your queries about what's going on with you, and then at the end I'll offer further support that if you're interested, if it would be helpful to you, then it's there. But I'm basically here to help you and your family flourish in sensory health. So just initially, just thinking, actually, even before we go any further, how many of you have actually, your children come out of school? Can you just raise your hand if you've actually, or wave at me, if your child has actually come out of school rather than, yes, we've definitely got one, rather than otherwise.
I'd say only my oldest, and that was 25 years ago when we started home educating. So
right, wow. And there are obviously Yeah, there's lots of reasons. Anybody else want to open up their mic? It's great, actually, folks can open up their mic and just tell me. Does everyone else start home editing from scratch?
Yeah, we started from scratch. Well, bar half a term, 2 mornings a week at a very small private school for my first child. Otherwise, we've home edited.
Right. Yeah. So it's interesting, and I think it's nice. Most of us were schooled. Perhaps some of you were actually homeschooled yourself, home educated. But basically, if you have a child who is fidgety and is sitting still, we can imagine the kind of things that folks are going to be able to say, or that happens in school. And humming and singing, you can accommodate that at home. We can talk about how to accommodate it better, but schools are not going to be up for that. But they're not going to let your child do that. If they're messy or they're picky eaters, or they don't eat at all, how that affects their afternoons, if they're going out to school without breakfast, how that affects their concentration levels, they don't do as well. Difficulties dressing, they can really get criticized, they feel really stupid. If they're in their class, if they go to PE lessons and they can't do those things, it's really can be really quite humiliating for our children. Handwriting, they're just not keeping up the rest of the class. They really start to hate school. They kick against you because you are taking them to school, or they want to get up and they touch everything, and they're going around and touching their classmates, touching everything else, and they get hit, or they get into fights. And there are things that happen at home, but stuff that happens at home is rarely ever on the same extreme that I see in school. More sensory issues. It could be that a child wants to rock and spin and hang upside down, and they're constantly on the go. In school, they're just like, that can't happen. It's just like, sit down. And so they hold it together. And then by the time they get home, goodness me, they have to really let off steam, or they have major meltdowns. It's really hard for you to handle. Big issues. Maybe they're mouthing clothing and objects, and they're constantly chewing on their school uniforms, and it needs to change their top throughout. Clumsy, messy, things get broken. It's easy for them to get shouted at. Other kids get annoyed with them. They might be anxious, nervous, stubborn, controlling. They don't want to go out for PE. They don't want to transition. They don't want to move to the next class. They don't want to go out on the school bus. They don't want to go in the first place, and they don't want to go out. And also they can be really easily distracted. Somebody says something across the room and their attention goes with it, and they can't focus. There's fluttering displays on the classroom wall. The lights are flickering because they're the fluorescent lights, because that's the cheapest lights that are available. Or you might have somebody who has lots of noise, lots of movement, really active in the class, which is really distracting. So school is having to cope with a massive amount of sensory input, not least to say that they are open plan classrooms, a lot of them. And my job going into schools is to say, look, we have to start from scratch. We really do. And assess the child well, but also provide completely sensory, specific situations for our individuals if they are going to survive and thrive, not even just survive. But at home we can accommodate and change so much, and that's what I want to encourage you in, and that's what I'd like us to be able to talk through a little bit more as to how I can actually help to speak into you and help you going forward from here. So but maybe we could just have again just a little bit of time and saying, like, so what does your child do? Let's see if it does have a sensory base, and did any of you experience those difficulties with sensory needs when they were actually in school, or even now schooling? Yeah, is it Leo?
Yeah, it's Leo. Yeah,
Leo.
it's Leo. Hi, guys. Yeah,
Hi.
so our family, we did start in school, and we just started our home education journey about a year and a half, 2 years ago. And that's, you pretty much described one of my one of my kids almost like, yep, that's like ticking almost every bullet point that you mentioned in the last few slides. And
Okay.
which is one of the main reasons why I had to just, you know what, why don't we just homeschool the younger kids? Because what we did first is we did like older kids wanted to do home education. They were in secondary school, pulled them out. They wanted to stay home and do their journey at home first. So when I decided to pull out my my youngest, at that time he was 5. So he basically, yeah, just cannot sit still. Like I have to be constantly giving him instructions to stay put, or if we have to stay put, but also give him, you know, freedom. So I do a lot of play-based learning with him, and just go, and a lot of interest-based learning with him, and move in some, you know, literacy and numeracy programs through it that he loves, using digital apps and stuff like that, which engages him for a short time, but no pressure, you know, like not like you have to do it today or whatnot. But and then my other younger daughter, so that was the 6-year-old now. And then the other younger daughter, she's like she's 10. She was diagnosed with dyslexia when we used to live in the US. We moved from Texas in 2019. So yeah, so that one's really kind of like caused her to be a little bit more less wanting to read, wanting to write. So for the first year of homeschooling, I didn't really force her too much to do too much writing up to grade level or whatever back then. But I did do a lot of like Waldorf style approach, and Reggio Emilia, even for a 10-year-old or a 9-year-old, likes to do crafting and things, and trying to connect that with whatever we're learning at the moment, but lots of tactile activities, but still couldn't quite get her to write. But at least, thank God, she's starting to read lots more. Like she just finished a bridge version of Persuasion, absolutely loves it. And this is from a kid who never wanted to sit down and read before. So really, so yeah, just trying to find ways to engage them in learning, and dealing with those sensory bits. And and she also cannot finish a project through and through. We have to kind of really break up.
Chunk it down.
Yeah, stretch it out quite a bit. So
yeah. Okay.
so that's just in a nutshell.
Yeah, I was going to say, I know, in a nutshell,
Sorry.
we could be here for ages, like chatting it through. Absolutely.
Exactly.
And we'll come back at the end. We'll speak a little bit more.
Right,
Actually, we'll just see anybody else dealing with and recognizing some of those issues that you have at home.
So I'm going to pop in with just with some of about this child that we're fostering at the moment, who they think might have sensory needs. One of the issues we have is around his diet. So he only eats certain foods, and we don't know if it's just because they're familiar and he recognizes the packaging, because he won't try anything. He pretty much won't try anything new. And it's kind of interesting. So he'll have certain infant like fruit bars and infant fruit pouches, that kind of thing. This is what he came to us with, you know, the diet. Then he loves toast. And he will sometimes eat pizza, and he will sometimes eat nuggets and that kind of chicken, you know, sort of little. And one of the only new things I got him to try was to put his crisps that he likes on his toast as a sandwich. So he doesn't have bread. I've had crisp sandwiches before, love them, but he'll have his crisps on a toast sandwich, and that was like kind of the fact, just to get him to try something that was a little bit different. But we're not quite sure what it is particularly that he's you know, got such an aversion to. So he only eats very specific chocolates. So if the chocolate looks a bit different to what he's used to, Easter eggs, like he wouldn't have his Easter egg, but then a week later he decided actually he would try it, and then he liked it and was fine. You know, it's just kind of. So it's hard to know whether it is a sensory issue or just like an unfamiliarity that not wanting to try something new.
Yeah, we're just in the middle of our, we've got like a 12 weeks stress-free mealtime program that we dissect every single sense, and we're looking at it and ways to introduce new bits and pieces as well in a way that's not threatening and raises their arousal levels and their fear factors. But there's an awful lot to eating for sure. Okay, and anybody else got any other issues we could always circle back to if we have time?
Yeah, we have some of the things that you mentioned, especially when, I mean, my youngest is 17 now. Probably my youngest and my second child are the ones who have sensory needs or sensory differences. Aside from the things that you've mentioned, I mean, some of these things you just work out by trial and error, which is one of the brilliant things about home ed. So when we did a bit of a Montessori start, which for sensory was fine, great. We also then did some Charlotte Mason, which involved some read aloud time. Now that was difficult from the sitting still point of view. So we just introduced colouring or some kind of craft, and all the kids did that. So, but we still have, my youngest, for example, finds it so much easier to concentrate if she's doing something with her hands.
Yeah.
If she isn't, she gets really distracted. And if she is, I mean, it's very counterintuitive from the normal way of doing things, because you feel like if you're doing something, you're going to be distracted, but it's just not how it works for her.
No.
And the good thing about when they get older is they can explain that to you, and you know that they wouldn't tell you something that wasn't true. So it's easier to feel really confident accommodating that, not just at home, but outside as well. And we also have some sound sensitivities, actually really serious sound sensitivities in the family. One of our children has what they call, you might have heard of it, Laure, but it's not very well known. It's called misophonia.
Yeah.
Which is a sensitivity to individuals' voices or small sounds or repetitive sounds or movements. So it's not sound defensiveness, which is a bit more common and well known. It's almost the opposite. So yeah, that's part of what we deal with.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else got anything just to say, any presentations of how their ones are?
I'm not sure whether this is sensory, but our 9-year-old has wanted his hair long and not cut at all. For 5 years, and he has very long hair.
Yeah.
And he just doesn't want anything cut off it.
Yeah.
There's not style, it's not, yeah.
Can I just check a couple of other things? Is it, how do you say your name?
Ioana.
Yeah. Ioana, can I just ask a couple of questions just to see if there's any more to it? That's the thing, when we're looking at sensory, you can have one-off things and they're just one-off things. Sometimes they're part of a cluster, and that's when we want to look at it and actually start treating it and changing things. So I would instinctively wanting to ask, getting his teeth brushed, was that ever an issue? Or is that an issue?
Little. Yeah, when he was little. The other thing that was interesting is he had some back teeth decay, and extractions were proposed. And at that age, it was before lockdown, so maybe about 3-4 years ago, he really hated the idea so much of anything being taken out. And so now he's coped very well with a private gentle dentist who's patched those, and they're still in his mouth, praise God, because he was terrified at the thought of being numb. No, he didn't want that, or being put to sleep, or having those things out. And we really didn't want to go against his instinct, because it seemed to be like a gut feeling against it. On the other hand, we didn't want decay and pain for him, so it was so hard. Yeah, and he chooses to only wear black tops and bottoms. He can have colors for pajamas and other items like pants and socks, but it's black tops and bottoms for the past 5 years.
Yeah. And tags in his clothes, what's he like with tags or seams in his socks?
Complaints? No, he's not complained about them.
Okay. So, and what about cutting nails, toenails?
For ages, I used to be compromising by doing it in the bath, and I told him it's softer, but yes, he did say, oh, it feels so different. Now he's fine. He's sort of grown more capable to, and he even does it himself. But yeah, so
Yeah.
it's
There
sort
might-
of something.
It's part, yeah, it's part of something. Yeah, there's a few things there. Anybody else? Actually, I did see something in the chat. Was there something somebody mentioned? Yeah, your daughter's very sensory avoidant with clothes, food, and loves lots of movement. Yeah, so sensory avoidant would be like that. We would class that as a sensory overreactivity. There's different types of sensory processing, different types of ways that we can respond to sensory input. That sensory avoidant is like that overreactive, so really don't want certain sight, smells, touch experiences, movement experiences, and sometimes they move, which is what's happening here, to help. It's their way of helping them modulate. It's helping their body get used to and being able to cope with all of this overreactive sensation. So movement, which you'll hear a little bit of, movement, that proprioceptive input, that information that comes from our muscles and our joints, helps calm the system down a bit. So lots of our people will be, we class sensory seeking, they will be moving a lot, often to block out and to try and regulate, to try and calm those overreactive systems. And it helps them feel better when they can actually move to help them cope with these things. Other people, other children will move for different reasons. And that's where we're always trying to find the sensory thumbprint. We're always trying to find what is unique about your child, about your family, and even about you, to make everybody thrive and flourish. So I'm just going to go back to the recording. Good to know we've got people who at least get what I'm talking about here. So let me screen share again. Okay, so we've got some sensory needs. So just to say that, yes, other people have been through this. We've been to speech and language therapists, other OTs had assessment by CAMS, also had prayer ministry at church. But this is the first time I feel anyone has fully understood our situation and offered anything specific to my daughter's needs. I feel so positive for the first time we're helping her in an effective and lasting way. It was lovely, she said, a meeting you marked a major turning point in our life. But it's just to say these things can change. The only downside of home educating is that sometimes you're so accepting of behaviors that you don't realize we can actually change things and we can make your life better. There is so much goodness and so much acceptance that is poured out that, as I say, the only downside is that sometimes it just gets in the way of you actually going for help and recognizing that things can be done to make your life a bit easier and their life a bit easier too. So let's go to sensory integration. About 1 in 20 of us are affected to the point that it gets in the way of life. We are all sensory beings. We are all processing sensory information all the time. That's not the issue. The issue is when it gets in the way of life. So by 7 or 8, typically our academic skills are there. We have that reasoning, basic coordination, concentration, self-esteem, self-control, and a degree of organizational skills. That sets us up well for the rest of development. If we've got an issue by that age and stage, then we want to go further back in the development to see, are there any other areas that we need to shore up? Because we want those foundations of development to be strong so that they can build on it for future. So we go back down and see, are there any issues in dressings or scribbling or playing or talking? Just checking the chat here, just checking you can actually see this. Okay, I'll come back to the chat in a moment. And then we go, we want to be going then further down in the development is where, babies are rolling and crawling. Did they crawl? Did they roll? Were they able to suck, swallow, eat? Did they have the muscle tone to be able to stand up at the same time as everyone else? And if they didn't manage any of those further steps, or if there were struggles in those further steps, then we go back to the senses. That's why this is so important. That's why I love talking about this, because they are there at birth. And there can be things that get in the way of that sensory integration, which impacts everything else on top of it. So it's about shoring up those sensory processing patterns and pathways. So the vestibular system is about, it connects with every single way our head moves. So every time your head moves, that's why we often get up. If we're feeling a bit drowsy, we'll get up and we'll have a walk around. And that stimulates our arousal levels, our levels of alertness, so we can concentrate. That's why some of yours will need to move more than others. Proprioception is the information that comes from our muscles and our joints. So every time again that we move, or that we push or we pull on things, we get some good information about our bodies and where it is in space, so we're not so clumsy. So vestibular proprioception are big senses for coordination and for staying in a calm, alert state. Interoception is about whether someone can tell they're toilet trained. They can feel that their bladder's full, they can feel that they're hungry, or they can feel that they're full. Any of those senses that aren't picked up can cause issues. And we're kind of familiar with the other 5 senses: their vision, their auditory, their hearing, their smell, their taste, which massively impacts picky eating or otherwise, and the tactile system, which we've just briefly looked at, which can be overreactive to the tags and the seams and the hair cutting and the hair brushing, particular textures of chairs, particular textures even of the paper that they go to write on, or they're not registering, or they're not reacting, they're not discriminating, they're not understanding that information that comes from their touch system, and they're really sloppy, they're really messy eaters. The clothes are hanging out all over the place. They cannot coordinate well because they can't feel very well. So we want to go in to help and treat that. So let's have a brief look at some of the senses and what might be going on. If somebody's fidgety, the proprioceptive sense, vestibular, tactile, auditory, olfactory, processing can all be affected into why somebody's fidgety. So it's not a question of just telling them to sit still. They'll probably sit still maybe for a minute or so, and then they'll be off again. It's a waste of time, to be honest. Just don't bother saying it. Unless it's on a real occasion where it's really important, and they will be able to hold it in probably for a little bit. But they're needing this input for lots of different reasons underneath it. But let's look at a few. They need to move, maybe, so that the brain knows where their body is. They don't register the senses without movement. So if you stay still, or if you close your eyes, you're going to be shutting out that stimulation, which is great when you want to go to sleep. You just close your eyes and your eyes don't see anything, so your brain can switch off. What happens when children don't move and they're not well integrated is that the brain goes, I don't know where I am. I need to move. When they move, they get that information from their muscles and their joints, their vestibular system for the receptors in the inner ear. And all of a sudden it's like, oh, I know where I am now. I'm here. And that's where we can get massive sleeping issues as well. Because as soon as the body shuts off and calms down and slows down, the brain is quite fearful of the environment, because the body is not well integrated. So they'll want to be in your bed. They'll need to be in your bed. They'll need to touch you. They might get up during the night because of that. It's not a conscious fear. It's a body and brain lower kind of fear, for want of a better word. Maybe they don't have the muscle tone or core strength to hold the body still. So again, they have to move to help have that muscle tone. Maybe they can't concentrate and will become too sleepy if they don't stimulate the vestibular system. So in the same way as we talked about before, you might get up and walk around. They might need to too, because otherwise they'll just slop over. And they might be bothered by sight, sounds, smells, the feel of the clothes. And so moving around drowns out those unwanted sensations. So this here is a picture of the vestibular system. This is like kind of like inside your ear. If you want to go and have a look and Google vestibular system, you'll see it picks up every single way that we move, when we tilt our heads, when we go backwards, when we go forwards. And that's why we have these spinners, we have people upside down. They're all stimulating these receptors. But also here, this is the cochlea. So for the humming and the singing, it's mainly about the auditory processing. But if they hum, they're also getting some tactile feedback. If you do it yourself, they're also getting that. So it gives them the sense of, okay, that's where I am. And that's why some children will hum while they're trying to eat, so they don't choke, because they can then feel their throat, and they're not going to get food stuck, because they're aware they can actually feel what's going on there much better. But if they're humming and singing, they might need to make their own noise to block out noise that bothers them. I think especially for Sinead, that'd be interesting to see with that misophonia, if other noises are made or things like that. And some need that additional input to focus and concentrate. So that some of your children will need to have music on in the background. And I would allow it, and don't accept that, no, that everything has to be quiet for them to concentrate. Some will really benefit from that extra auditory input. But if it bothers the rest of the household, then make sure they have headphones on, so that we're not clashing sensory needs, which is the case in a household. Often some people are really want something and the others don't. So there is an art in balancing and finding the right sensory blend for the way that your family works. So if we look at dressing, this could be, their issues could be due to tactile, proprioceptive, their vision, auditory or vestibular processing, all involved in dressing. It could be the motor planning of working out where my hands are supposed to go when I'm pushing a button through, where my individual fingers need to go, or how to actually coordinate one arm and then the other arm and pull it round. And it's massively involved. There's a lot involved in actually getting dressed. The organization, the sequencing, those fine motor skills, spatial awareness of where your body is so you don't fall over if you're trying to get your trousers on. Bilateral coordination, because you've got two sides of the body doing different things. You're balanced, you're following instructions. It's just, oh, go and get your shoes on, or go and get your socks. And all of there's lots of auditory stuff that can come into getting dressed that we need to look at carefully and dissect and find out if there's an issue with dressing, what is going on in all of these senses. Handwriting, again, is tactile, proprioceptive, vestibular, visual, and auditory processing mainly. Why? Because maybe they can't feel the pencil, the tactile system, so they grip it hard. Their hands might get sore, they might not like the feel of the paper, their fine motor skills, their spatial awareness, their visual perception of understanding what letters look like and which way around your B's and your D's go. Core strength in the back, in the tummy, to be able to sit upright rather than slumping over the table. And so that hands, shoulders, forearms are all stable, so that those little muscles can actually work really well for handwriting. We've got following instructions, we've got muscle memory. And that's why I do it. We've got in July a 12-week handwriting with ease course. So we're just finishing our stress-free meal times. We're now doing a handwriting with ease course over the summer, ready for hopefully getting better and starting in September. That's a course for the parents. It's not, I'm not teaching children how to handwrite. I'm there for the parents, to support the parents so that they can support their children. And then if they are touching everything and everyone, they're seeking, they're getting more tactile input, proprioceptive, visual processing. And we often talk about thresholds when we come to sensory processing. So they're not meeting their threshold of sensory input to engage their brain. So they need more. They need more tactile input in order to make sense of what they see. So if you're looking at your computer screen at the minute, you don't have to touch it. You can just look at it and think, well, it's plastic or it's metal. It looks quite hard. It has a shiny surface. It might be quite cold. These are things that you can identify without having to touch. Our children who need to touch haven't got there yet. They are needing that extra tactile feel of everything in order to make sense of things that they are seeing. Sometimes they do it because they want to regulate their systems because they're overwhelmed, and that's where a lot of the fidget toys come in, and that are really helpful for fidgeting. And it's important that we allow our children to fidget. So I give you a lot of permission. If you've been conscious before that they shouldn't be doing things, hopefully after this you will allow yourself and allow your children to actually do some fidgeting. Technically, sensory processing difficulties are split into 3 main areas. You've got sensory modulation, which is very much that overreactivity, that sensory avoidant. I don't want to be touched. I don't like the smell, the sound, the sights of this, or they're not registering at all. And that's when you get the messiness and just not registering with information, will often miss information. Sensory discrimination is, can they pick out the detail in something? Can they pick out the detail of how a letter looks to be able to identify what it actually is? Can they get something out of their bag just by the feel of their touch? Or do they actually have to open it or empty it out to actually see what it is? And then a sensory-based motor disorder, as it's called, or a sensory-based motor issue, is very much if they're clumsy, if they're walking into the door frames, if they're tripping over themselves, if they're really heavy-footed. So there's different types of sensory issues that we look at. And we've all got a sensory thumbprint, absolutely unique and individual. And the sensory super system that I work with helps identify, it takes parents and teachers and whoever else through a process to identify each individual child's sensory thumbprint. Because what someone needs, once we've found their thumbprint, we need to get unique lighting options for them. Do they need their work to be highlighted in a certain way? Do they need task lighting? What kind of visual environment do they need? Their sounds, again, do they need music in the background? Smells, you might find that some of yours really love some smells. What about that balance between their work times and their rest times? Times to regulate and so not get quite so anxious and be quite more controlled and get the right kind of arousal level. At home, you can completely go with the flow. And I would really look at, don't expect maybe in your schedule that you have, right, they're going to sit for 45 minutes. For some of them, just again, give yourself permission that actually when you know that they're fading after about 10 minutes, that's okay. Concentrate on that 10 minutes, let them go and jump on the trampoline or roll around on the floor and then come back for another 10-minute burst. Totally be free to go with their flow. Exercise is brilliant. It's a very regulating, organizing sensory input that hits on so many levels. And reminding you that instructions delivered in a way they can understand and at their level is crucial, really, really, really important. And don't be led by almost anybody else. You know your child better than anybody else. Just take time to observe and don't put any expectations. Maybe they need like visual pictures to see how to sequence, how to get dressed. Or you need to write down, this is the order of what we're going to do in the day, so that they can feel a bit calmer and a bit more relaxed, that they know they've got a good idea of what's happening. Yeah, and they can wear the clothes that they want to wear and sit on a seat of their choice. Okay, you have the freedom to do this, which they can't do in school, whether it be black or any other texture. We have that freedom, and it, you know, this conference is all about freedom, and sitting on a seat of their choice. It might be that they want to sit on a ball and bounce, or a peanut ball, They might want to lie on the floor. They might want to hang upside down, but you can still do maths upside down. I used to do mine on the trampoline. Well, I wasn't on the trampoline. My boys were on the trampoline. And I would just call out their sums to them, and they would do it while they were bouncing around. Not that my children have sensory needs. They're just boys. So look for the sensory qualities so that you can adapt them and go with the flow. Tune into your children that bit more. Tune into you, your husband, anybody else. Because it is much easier for you to adapt to the subtleties of your family, or your family sensory processing than a school can, because they're dealing with so many different children. So just last couple of minutes, just some things, if this is helpful. 24th of June, I'm doing a sensory thumbprint discovery day. So we're going to take from 10 till 3 to actually look. It'll be virtual as well. Because you can't meet sensory needs unless you know what they are, and that's why we're taking the day to assess what their sensory systems actually are doing. Any who are involved in a church, you might be interested. There's a sensory healthy church that's just free. That's from the website chots.co.uk. There's a 3-hour training for churches. It can be used for organizations. It can be used for lots of things. But designed for the churches, because we did a survey in 2022. But here, the sensory super parent system is annelaurejackson.com, and just a little bonus. There's Juliet's always up for any special offers. So anybody who connects at annelaurejackson.com, there'll be 50% off for the first 5 people who schedule in a 15-minute Zoom call that you can do from that website. And if you're interested in joining the program that lasts between 6 months to a year, because it's about equipping you as parents to really understand your child, and then you can empower them to empower themselves. But it starts with you first, because you're the one that's going to be there for them for years to come. It's much better than me as an occupational therapist just trying to treat your child. I'm very much about equipping the parents. As homemaking mums and parents, we are very capable if we know what to do. So I'm there to help show what you can do. A sensory health coach is pretty much who I am or what I am in social media. The information's there if you want to look back at it. Specifically, for those, there's a Jersey version. I have 3 different websites that will come off the annelaurejackson.com. OT Jersey for those in Jersey, because that's where I'm based. Sensory processing, that's for regular, for those not in Jersey, UK, international folk. And then we have chots.co.uk for those looking for more Christian faith-based support. So that's why we have the differences in the websites. But if you go to annelaurejackson.com, it's all there anyway. But thank you for listening. Let's have some time to chat. And I do wish your sensory health santé. So stop sharing and see any questions. We've got 10 minutes left before we actually sign out. The next one starts. Any specific questions or feedback or comments from what we have, what we've looked at? And I'll have a quick check in the chat as well. Just open up your mic if you've got anything to say.
I was just gonna say that was really good. I just kept, I know it was like, we're gonna get a copy of this video later on, but it's just really good to see the various things that I've already incorporated that was actually helpful, even though I don't see much progress, very little progress, but sometimes it does backfire occasionally. I think my one major question, and I don't know if this would be part of the sensory bit, is my youngest, he tends to just lash out. Like, I don't know if that's more like a different side of things. And so we just give him tactics to help him to calm down, but that's not always as effective. So I don't know if you're able to speak into that.
if we go through like the courses, understanding, we get a sensory thumbprint together, then we do some basic management techniques, and then we look at sensory diets and self-regulation before moving on to, is it sensory behavior or a heart issue, looking at their attitudes and trying to work out where it's all coming from. But that bit there, that self-regulation can be massively impacted, that hitting out, that going from 0 to 100 immediately. That can have a big sensory underpinnings to it, especially when it comes to the overreactivity. And that's where we would want to check every single sense, their touch system in particular, their movement system, their auditory system. Those are the big three for quite explosive responses. So if we can calm those by the treatments that we do, by the auditory training programs that we use, by the everyday techniques and strategies and tips and changes in the environment, we can really reduce those. But yes, it could have a sensory base. It might not, but until we know, because I know the sensory processing is so foundational to everything, I always say, look, let's look at the senses first, because if we can change the senses, then you don't have to go into behavior management, you don't have to do reward systems, you don't have to do any of that, because actually you've met their sensory need and the behaviors just either stop or they reduce in a way that's manageable.
So with misophonia, I can confirm with misophonia, which is at least partially auditory processing, it's one of the characteristics of it is that you're going to have a fight or flight response. So there might be instant rage. And although my daughter's come a long way from our Christian spiritual point of view, but also over the years, she's not quite in the worst place that she was in a few years ago, but she's still having to deal with that sensory reaction. She's just learned how to deal with it differently. But it's definitely can be. I'm not saying it is for you, but it can definitely be part of it. Depending on what's going on.
And Sinead, have you recognized, are there any other senses like that, the tactile system or movement? Is she sensitive to movement in any way, or does it really seem to be that clear auditory
when she
issue?
Was there are definitely multiple issues. She does have other sound reactions. She also has she had a phase where she was constantly pulling up her socks, just could never get them to feel right, just constantly pulling them up. And also smells. She definitely smells things a lot stronger than most of us. Taste, again, she will always opt for things that have really strong tastes. When she was small, she used to always give squeezy hugs, really tight. You can almost break your ribs kind of hugs. And I think that was all sensory seeking. Following instructions was a bit difficult in terms of, and we queried ADHD when she was younger, but I think it was probably sensory, because just had to break it down into smaller amounts, not give too many instructions at once. Because if there are too many instructions at once, she would head off with the full intention of doing exactly what you'd asked her to. And 10 minutes later, she'd have been distracted by something else, probably because she got lost in that process. She wasn't trying to be naughty or anything. She just, and then she suddenly realized, I was supposed to be doing something. Oh. We've got a comment in the chat. I think.
Okay, I'll go and have a look at those. Also, we have some powerful, a couple of weeks of treatments can really change a lot of those overactivities, can really calm the systems down. They're pretty powerful. They're quite intense. But it's nice to know that we have things we have things that we can do that can change things around quickly. There are other things that will take time, but we definitely have some treatments that will act quickly on our children. So I'll just read out some of these. So my second
very relevant to us as well. I empathize with the comment in the chat.
There's two. I'll read. My second born never seems to stop moving, wiggling. He's sensitive about being stuff. He's sensitive about stuff being or appearing murky or gooey. I think we've got these tactile overreactivity, I imagine there. During read aloud time, I tire a lot, constantly trying to get him to calm down or to sit still. I would definitely be looking at his tactile system. and seeing what else we can, how we can help settle him that way. And when we talk about a sensory diet, it's about getting the right kind of things throughout their day, which is what you can easily do in home ed. But it's just knowing what to do, how long to do it for, how to make it specific to your child. That's all the stuff that we want to help equip you to be able to do. And then we've got another one. 2 of my children are extremely demand avoidant. So although we have had OT to help identify sensory needs, they still reject things that might help them. I know that is a massive, it is a massive thing. And we just have to work around it. And that's where, when it's about you at home, when you really understand their particular thumbprints, and when you know that the mastery side of it, of what kind of things would help. And when you're talking with like demand avoidant, you can't do it in the typical way, or you can't take them to a therapy session. It has to be that very home ed approach, is that you take those teachable moments, you take those sensory moments, you take those opportunities to introduce things in a way that you know that the only way that you can do, rather than addressing it straight on and saying, well, right, we're going to do this now, because that's not going to work. They're not going to react to that very well at all. So that's where it's about us equipping you so that you can then find that flow. Often talk about a flow in your home edding day, where you just you sense what's happening, and over time the demand avoidant ones can learn what is helpful and what's not. A lot of our, okay, we've got PDA, that's one thing, and we've got stubbornness, which can be sensory based. So a lot of our stubborn children will become less stubborn when they understand that we get them, and we understand how distressing somebody coming up in unexpectedly is to them, or the sound that's coming from the neighbors, or the alarm, or the fact that it's too cold in the house, or. So once we've got that communication channel open through exploring their sensory needs, the stubbornness often dissipates, because actually they don't have to be so protective anymore, so controlling of their environments. Some of our PDA will also have that sensory overload. Some of them won't, that'll be a different part of the brain, but some definitely do have that sensory overload that is not being recognized at the moment. So it is really important. I suppose that's for other people, maybe not for you, Gemma, if you've had that support already, that there are definitely some of our demand avoidant ones that are definitely being demand avoidant, but because of sensory issues, and they've just had to learn to say no, and had to put boundaries up with the things that they will do or won't do, and unfortunately have generalized it. But if we can get them, a little bit more regulated, then they're often more accommodating.
Your teachable moment thing is really relevant there, because I mean, the daughter that I'm talking about with misophonia is now 20, so obviously that's a little bit different situation, but I think finding the moments when something has worked, or you can see because you understand now what's going on, or did you see when that happened, then that was better, or that was easier. Certainly with my older kids, I find that works much better than saying, oh, by the way, you need to do this, or stop doing that, or start doing this. It's rather than be instructive, find that moment when you see a good sensory experience, say, oh, that worked really well, didn't it? And then leave it, because their background process at the time, there might be resistance because it's change, or it's difficult, or it's scary, or whatever. But if you mention it in passing, then, well, for my daughter anyway, she will often background process something and then register it and use it again later.
Yeah, perfect. So thank you ever so much for your time. As I said, that there's books out there on Amazon, Home Educating a Sensory Child with Ease. We've got the handwriting program, stress-free mealtimes program, sensory super parents. There is an offer for you, or there's plenty of free stuff if you want to have a look at what's going on in social media. But yeah, if there's anything I can do to help, just tell me and I'll put it out there. And we've got free Facebook group as well. But thank you, Sinead, for your time.